Hi guys, it's Paul from Itris and welcome to episode 10 of The Corner. On today's episode, we're going to be talking to our Operations Director and Head of Human Resources, Andy Dobson. Prior to working at Itris, Andy had a career that spanned over 20 years in finance with the likes of BT and O2. Hi Andy, thanks for coming on The Corner. I want to talk to you today about some important topics related to human resource and employee management. The job landscape has changed dramatically over the last few years for various reasons. What have companies had to do in order to cope with that?
Well, firstly, I think you're right. The landscape has changed. COVID changed the world of work quite dramatically. And not only COVID, I mean, just before COVID, we had Brexit as well, which I think also made a difference. And where we ended up was certainly from one perspective, more jobs than applicants, which obviously made it more difficult for companies to recruit and retain staff as well, because if there's better jobs on offer, people are going to go. So I think companies all of a sudden found themselves in a place where they not only had to adapt to retain good people, but they also had to adapt again or change their offering to attract people, because there was so much out there. And also they've had to improve the packages they offer to attract new staff. Working practices have changed and people's expectations have changed as well. Many business owners have had to accept things that possibly they wouldn't have accepted pre-COVID, certainly in terms of home working, flexible working. For many business owners, especially ones probably of my generation, a lot of these things are quite alien.
And it was quite a quick change, wasn't it, in terms of, it's gone from this sort of way of working to a brand new way of working within a very short space of time. We're talking a couple of years, and historically that change might have taken 10, 15 years in a workforce.
Absolutely.
So the companies and business owners have had to adopt this very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think that there were no choices. As we said earlier, the job market all of a sudden was completely different in terms of the opportunities that people had. They got very used to, during COVID, the flexibility that home working gave them, driven by the pandemic, that, there was no choices here. People had to work from home.
Yeah.
And that was all there was to it. But, the thought of them then coming back and going back to the old 9 to 5 and working full time in the office, it was just never going to happen. And as I say, some business owners would have really struggled with that. And I completely understand that.
So in terms of how packages and how businesses changed in terms of perhaps their culture and what their offerings are, you've obviously seen that change a lot over your career. But what does it look like in terms of, a modern day package compared to, say, a package, either you worked at BT and O2 previously, what a package for a senior member of staff might have looked like back then?
Well, I think the point you make there, and the word you use, senior member of staff, is the interesting one, because I think what you're finding now is that these packages are coming much further down through the workforce. So historically, if you were a non-management grade in a business of that size, certainly in government, well, I say government-run ones, I mean, historically it was government-run, BT, for example, but once it privatised, still very much that it was more senior management and managers that got the benefits. And if you were not a manager, you didn't really get those benefits in many ways. I'll give you an example of when I was an engineer for BT. For a Christmas do, we used to get a £10 allocation to have a Christmas do. So if 20 guys were going, there was £200 allocation for that Christmas do.
Did all of that go on alcohol? Or?
well, you had your choice. You could either have some dinner or you could have a drink. But if your line manager didn't go, for example, you didn't get the money at all.
Right.
Now, I must admit that was somewhat cultural. And when I moved away from being an engineer and went to work in London for BT at the BT Centre, it was slightly different in terms of culture. So not only was it regional, but it was dependent on what sort of department you're in as well. But most definitely at that point, if you weren't a manager, you weren't getting anything of any substance.
So would it just be basic salary, perhaps a bonus? There was no other...
No, you didn't get bonuses unless you were a manager.
Oh, right, okay, so bonuses...
No, I'm talking about BT at that point, no, too. But I would imagine most ex-civil service, ex-government business were the same, and probably many larger companies were much like that. But then once you got into on the management step on the ladder, you started to get bonuses and you started to get car allowances, that sort of stuff. But and you might get a bit of private health as well. But it was nothing like that is on offer now. Now, one of the things you would have got certainly as an engineer would have been life cover, death in service. I mean,
yeah. But was that because of the risk of the role?
No, it would have been. Those were the days of strong union representation, and those are the sort of things that have been negotiated.
Right, so they were pushing for that for the workers.
So what you'd have got is certainly 6 months full pay.
Right,
if you were sick, death in service, those sorts of things as a non-manager. But the sort of benefits that we talk about now being benefits, such as private health, that sort of thing. You really were into you had to be a manager before you got those.
Okay.
Now, this is where it's different, because what we're finding now is that we're having to offer it across the board, which I think is a really positive thing. And I think what I've found is, whilst researching this and rolling it out across the business, is cost. I had a vision that something like private health cover for the business and everybody within it would be really, really expensive. We've gone for Bupa, and we've gone for the top end of Bupa. And, I won't go into exactly what the cost is, but I think I was very surprised about what the level of costing was. Now, obviously, that cost will increase year on year because it's actually based on age. It's a pretty straightforward model. What they'll do is they'll say, right, we'll exclude every previous health problem you've had.
Yeah.
So we're not going to cover those. And then based on your age, we'll charge you this premium per year.
Yeah.
And then next year, that premium will go up because your age will go up. Yeah. So it's a really
high risk.
Yeah. The older you get, the bigger risk you are, obviously. But so it's a pretty straightforward model. If you've got a young workforce, it's a really cheap thing. And, that's obviously based on risk for the provider, because young people generally aren't quite as ill as older people.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said the cost was reasonable, because again, I suppose unless you look into that. But again, I assume it's definitely more than your £10 Christmas do budget.
Of course. Yeah. Absolutely.
And again, it's interesting what you say about the Christmas do, because I think, again, that's let's say that was 20 years ago, maybe. That was kind of the norm. I'm
older than I look, but
yeah. With things nowadays, and not just packages nowadays, but we've talked previously on the corner about like culture, company culture, and obviously we work in the recruitment industry, and culture is a massive thing for some recruitment businesses in terms of sort of young trendy companies. Obviously it's a very casual sort of workforce. There's all this flexible sort of working from home, or flexible hours. It doesn't matter when you work, but as long as you get the work done type thing.
Yeah.
The same will happen with specifically Christmas do or Christmas dues, but also sort of nights out, incentives and that kind of thing. So we've gone from here's your £10 sort of Christmas do to actually there's a quarterly trip to Ibiza, which probably costs thousands and thousands of pounds. But that's almost an expectation for some, and I feel like some companies have had to adopt this to attract that skill and retain
those
good employees, rather than losing them to a competitor that perhaps are offering those things.
Yeah, and that's particularly in a sales environment as well.
Yeah,
which, and you might obviously you're going to do the numbers before you do that, and you're going to be sure that you're going to get the revenue that you require to roll those sorts of benefits out. So you're going to do your cost analysis before you start. Slightly different in our industry, obviously. I mean, obviously we have salespeople within our business.
Sure.
But for the rest, the developers and that sort of thing, a trip to Ibiza, although
probably wouldn't appeal. Yeah, probably wouldn't appeal to them quite as much as a salesperson. I get that,
but I'm sure it would do. But you've got to find other incentives. And one of the real challenges we have is that we're not, although we're not London based, we're out sort of 25 miles south of London in Tunbridge Wells, but we have easy access, good transport into London. So therefore, as a business, we are competing with businesses in London.
Sure.
In terms of salary. I mean, let's face it, the biggest benefit you can give anybody is a decent salary. But when you're a small business like ourselves, or reasonably small business like ourselves, and we're competing with London wages, we can't compete with London wages to an extent, and we choose not to. So we have to offer a little bit more. And when I talk about benefits like healthcare being cheap, well, okay, they're not. You may look at it and say, well, it's not that cheap, but actually, in terms of comparing it with what we might pay in terms of salary, it does become cheap. And if it's something that retains people, because actually they look at it and think, well, I do welcome not doing the commute every day, so I accept that I've got to take a slightly lower salary from not working in town. But what else can they offer me just to retain me and make me feel comfortable? Well, that's where we are with benefits, because that's what we're trying to do. Because we're trying to say, well, we're not going to pay you what you're going to get in town, even though it's an hour's commute there and back. So let's give you something else to keep you or attract you to work for us, as opposed to doing that journey. And let's face it, I mean, the older you get, the less you really want to do that that hour in the morning or hour and a half in the morning, and the hustle and bustle of having to, especially when you get kids. I mean, the last thing you really want to do is extending your day by maybe 3 hours.
Yeah.
So,
and it's stress as well.
Absolutely.
The extra stress that comes with that commute, either to and from, can really impact people's physical or mental health.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things as well, you say about London salary, obviously, the whole work from home thing, we'll come onto that in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
But a lot of people that were having to commute into London had the same salary than when they were working from home, either during COVID or this new era. But actually what we're starting to see now is that reversing, and people now having to return to office. So BlackRock just this morning has said all employees in the office 4 days a week. So that's been headline news this morning. And that's basically a call back to the office. Yeah. Salesforce did it a few months ago. And what we saw was people now being disgruntled that they're having to cover their commuting costs, and they're having to add extra time on their day, despite probably the majority of them were doing that pre-COVID. Yeah. But they're almost disgruntled now, and they're sort of looking around at well, actually, I can work full remote and have the same.
Well, it's an interesting point, that. I mean, and I'll hark back to 20 years ago. I'm not quite sure how it works in terms of salaries now, whether it's just built in, but certainly, let's take BT, which is a good example of that, where you had a grading structure within the business, and you had the similar grades both wherever you worked. But if you worked in London, you would get paid what we call London weighting. Now, I don't know sure if that's still part of the salary, or it's just incorporated in the salary. But if you worked in London, you would get an extra, let's say, 10% on top of your salary, which was to cover your commuting costs or your housing costs, effectively. I'm sure a lot of those people who are now working from home full time and weren't pre-COVID would already have had that London weighting baked into their salary, so they were on better salaries anyway. So they're doing really quite well over it. I'm actually not surprised that companies are starting to drive people back to the office to a certain extent. Look, I see massive benefit in people working from home. I think you get a much happier workforce. It gives people the ability to manage their lives. It reduces their stress, undoubtedly. But I think there are some downsides to it. Let's take our businesses as an example. We were a little unfortunate, really, because we rolled out our brand new version of the software right at the start of COVID. And that was challenging in itself. All of a sudden, we were, within a couple of months, you and I, Paul, we were focusing on trying to keep the business together. With clients ringing up saying we're struggling to trade, we need to reduce our licenses, all of that sort of thing. And the new product, we were trying our best to roll it out. But what was more important for me was that what we wanted within the business was a real buzz about that new product. And that would have driven it. I mean, it would have motivated people to actually drive that. But what we had was lots of people working from home, some people furloughed, so no focus on the new product at all. And I think we lost a lot. And I think in general, what you do lose, we get the positives of home working, of course we do. But what you do lose is that camaraderie. Yeah. You lose the communication in many ways. I think we do Zoom meetings now, or we do probably more Teams meetings and that sort of stuff. And they tend to be quite clinical for me. We get on, we might have a little bit of chit chat to start with, but once we're on, we do the meeting. And once we finish the meeting, we're done, we switch off. What you used to get, and we still do if we do it in person, with a meeting, is that actually the precursor to that meeting is always gradually coming in the 10 minutes talking and chatting. Now, firstly, that's great for camaraderie. It's great for friendships, and it builds relationships within the business. The second thing is the amount of times I would sit in a meeting and someone would say, "Oh, I haven't seen you for a while. What are you working on? Oh, I'm working on this. Any problems? Yeah, I've had a bit of a problem with this. Oh, blimey, I've had that before as well."
Yeah.
So that exchange of knowledge that we used to get, we don't get so much now, and I think we've lost a lot. So in many ways, I'm not surprised that that people are being drawn back into the office. With many jobs, it's very difficult to measure the productivity. If you take our guys for a developer, for example, some of the development is very creative. It's not as easy as saying, right, here's this job, go and produce this piece of work. It will take you 1 hour.
Yeah.
Far from it. You know, there's a complexity to it.
Yeah.
It might take 4 hours. How you measure that, I don't know. So when people are working from home, there's a massive amount of trust, because as a manager, if I can't define how long a task should take, how can I gauge how hard you've been working? So that trust is enormous. And with software development as well, there will always be bugs. So, you know, bug fixes, how long do they take? I don't know. How many bugs we got with this particular bit of development? It's very different.
And I think we're quite fortunate enough to, you know, we've over the 25 years that we've been going, we've got a really good employee retention. Employee retention over that period.
Yeah.
You know, some of the staff who have worked here 24 years.
Absolutely.
It's not uncommon that 18. I've been here 12. You've been here 10. You know, we're all very long-standing sort of members of staff, and I think that trust is easier when someone's work, because you have that trust there. But I think what you're saying is again that sort of joint up sort of teamwork and bouncing off each other in terms of personality and just being personable with people is easier face to face.
Certainly.
You know, so that's
certainly one of the things we've done. One of the benefits we've rolled out, as you know, is to say, what we've done as a business is acknowledge home working. And said, you know, we accept that people will work from home and we will be supportive of that. But what we have said now is that we want everybody in the office at least 1 day a week on the same day.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally what we want is people in, I would say 3 days a week, 3 out of 5 in the office. That's not always going to work for people. People have other commitments now. I mean, that's the interesting thing about COVID, isn't it? That people started working from home and developed other commitments around their life that they don't really want to give up now. You know, it might be the
like a dog.
Well, like a dog. Don't start me on dogs. COVID dogs. But that's where it's changed things so much. And it's not as easy to say to somebody, well, actually, during COVID, you were working full time from home. Thanks for that, and thanks for your commitment. But now I want you back. And they tell me, I said, well, hold on. In that 2-year period, my life changed completely. And if you want to retain me, I need to carry on with these things because they're very important to me.
And actually, I think, and that's fair, if they can prove that actually I can do my job from home.
Yeah.
And I think that's what has changed the culture, is people proving that actually I'm really productive from home.
Yeah.
You know, I get the same amount of work done. I might do it in less time because actually I know if I finish, I can stick a wash load on. I can go and mow my grass at lunchtime and that kind of stuff. So it's fitting that whole sort of personal lifestyle in around your work. And I think many businesses have found a really good balance of that. But I think it's important to have both. I think people working remotely full time, you know, I've spoken to people over the last couple of years that have worked for a company for 2 or 3 years and they haven't met in person the people that they work with regularly. So, you know, all they know is sort of this behind the screen.
I really don't see that as a positive thing. I don't see that as a positive thing in terms of culture or you know, just being a human being. I think it's important interaction for everybody. And to think that you could work from home full time and never actually meet your work colleagues, it's not something that sits well with me.
Yeah. Some people it does, though.
I agree with that. Yeah. It may, and that may be the future in some aspects of the working world. I think what's interesting is, I mean, we as a business have a very diverse set of skills and jobs. We've got people that are very technical developers. We've got trainers. We've got salespeople. We've got marketing people. We've got
support staff.
We've got support staff and project managers. Now, all of those have different ways of working. Now, as a support person on a help desk, where you've got clients working specific hours, there's no way you can be flexible with that. You know, you need to be in between these hours to work. So it's harder to give that flexibility. Sure, you can do it from home from time to time, but in general, you've got a very prescribed working time, working pattern, absolutely. Whereas other jobs, you might, I mean, I would say your job is reasonably prescribed because you're a salesperson, so therefore you need to be speaking to people when they're in the office. But there are other jobs like development or project management where actually it might benefit us if you did the work out of hours. You know, if you're a project manager and you're delivering some software that needs some downtime, well, that's great. If you can do it out of hours, it suits the client and you know, it will suit us. So I think when you're looking at home working and flexible working, there are some rules for some and some rules for others, and that can sometimes be a little bit difficult. But it's got to be what benefits the business and the individual at the same time. I think that's where things have changed to a certain extent. You know, whereas businesses historically would have said, well, it's what benefits the business and the individual can get on with it if they don't like it. You know, I think we've changed culturally, really, from those days to now, that actually it needs to benefit all. And you know, and if it benefits all, nobody loses.
Right.
That's the important thing. So I think what I'm saying with that is that actually when you look at some roles, from a manager's perspective, as long as the job gets done, that's probably all I'm worried about. And as you say, if that means that someone's working during the day from home and they go off and nip to the shops to do their weekly shop, or go pick the kids up from school, or put the wash load on, or spend an hour talking to their partner about changing their mortgage, that sort of stuff's going to happen. I mean, you've got to be realistic about it. But you know what? If that means that they're still working at 7:30 and they're getting the job done, where's the problem? I don't see the problem. If you've got that level of trust and you're happy that you're getting the delivery that you want, I think it's actually a really positive thing all round, and I think it suits all parties.
So, Andy, we talked a little bit there about company benefits. One of the questions I've got here, company benefits are an essential part of an employee's compensation package. What are some common and innovative benefits that companies can offer to attract and retain employees, and what are some of our benefits?
Okay, it's one of the things you're looking at as a business. I mean, let's be realistic about it. We're running a business here, so you know things have got a cost in. So you're trying to look at benefits for the company that actually benefit the business, and we can afford them. So initially, I'm looking at things that are the cheapest possible.
Quick wins.
Quick wins, absolutely. Good phrase. You look at what people want in nowadays, and what they want is flexibility and the ability to spend time with their families or time doing what they want to do. So leave is additional leave and shortened working times, that sort of thing, are the sort of things that, you could argue there's a bit of a cost there. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, we've got a workforce that I trust who get the job done anyway. So giving them an extra couple of days leave a year really doesn't impact us too highly. So what we did was, you know, as an example, new starters historically would have got 20 days leave up front per year, increasing to 25 after 5 years service. So what we did is, okay, let's forget that. 20 days leave in this day and age, it doesn't seem a lot really. So
that just to be clear, that would bank holidays would be on top of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So some companies don't include bank holidays. So we would have 20 days plus you get bank holidays.
Absolutely.
And time off in between Christmas and New Year. So that would have been seen actually a few years ago as very generous. But today, perhaps,
and it's the requirement by law. So you know those 8 days and the 20. So you know we're not giving away too much there. We did, as you say, you always give the 3 days between Christmas and New Year, which I think was a good perk, to be fair. But what we chose to do here was actually say, right, as a start, anybody who starts with the business will start with 25 days plus the 8 days plus the 3 days in between Christmas and New Year. Now, of course, that whatever you do, you always cause a little bit of frustration because there were people that have been here for 3 years or maybe 4.5, or maybe 5 years or 1 month.
Just hit their 5, got their extra 5.
That's right.
And then someone that's been here a few days automatically gets to 25.
Sure.
But yeah, you got to do it at some point.
But yeah, I mean, where is that line? So that's one of the things we look to do. We reduced working hours about 12 months ago, maybe more than that. You know, not by much, 2.5 hours a week, but actually that took it slightly further down the route in terms of reducing those hours and getting it probably more aligned with other businesses. So there's some examples of the flexibility that you can do really quite cheaply. Then we moved on to some of the other stuff. Is over a year ago we rolled out the Bupa Healthcare, as I talked about before. This year, recently, we've rolled out death in service with people guaranteed, or people's loved ones, or whoever they nominate, guaranteed at least four times their salary should they unfortunately die, and that's tax free as well. So, and that's immediately payable. So again, it's an interesting thing. I see that as a great benefit, but then I'm a little older. I would see that somebody who had kids would see that as a great benefit.
Yeah.
But you know what? Other people may see that as, well, fair enough. I'm 25. I've got no kids.
And unfortunately, they may never see the benefit, because in order to appreciate the benefit,
Yes, right,
you may be dead.
That is true.
Bit morbid, but
fortunately, there's no P11D effect, so it's not costing you. But there you go. But that's one thing. The other thing was income protection, which, again, I think is a marvellous benefit. It's something that says, right, if you're off sick for 3 months, after 3 months, you will receive 75% of your salary until you either come back to work or retire. So that could mean if you had a serious accident at 30, God forbid, you get paid 75% of your salary, assuming you didn't get another job, if you're unable to work until currently 67. I mean, that is a massive benefit. Obviously, it's only you only take it up if in terrible circumstances, but
sure.
It's a really quite a big deal.
It's that peace of mind, I think, for a lot of
I agree.
Staff as well, isn't it?
I agree.
Actually, that's nice, because it's just one less thing. Some people will worry about that more than others.
Yeah.
But actually, I think as you get older, particularly like you said, once if you start to have children and a family that you're now spending more time with, because you've got the flex and stuff like that. Yeah. That can be seen as a really good perk.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Some of the other things that we've done, monthly lunch club. It's little things like that again, it's just that cultural thing. Yeah. So you said earlier, we've asked everyone to come in on the same day every week, just to get that buzz sort of back in the office, because what we were finding is some people would come in on certain days. We were offering that full flex in terms of working. Yeah. But typically you might have some people come in some days, some people come in the other. So now we've got, on a Tuesday, everyone is in the office, and actually it's a really good buzz about the office. Good to see sort of everyone. And on the last Tuesday of every month, we're quite fortunate to have a pub just for the rest of our office. So we'll go over to the pub and we socialise and we have lunch. Yeah. Now, what do you think of that in terms of the costs and the benefit? What are the benefits of doing that compared to the cost of doing that?
Well, in the grand scheme of things, it's not particularly expensive. What we're doing, we're buying everybody a sandwich. Yeah. And a soft drink. So we're not encouraging drinking alcohol at work.
Yeah, sure.
I suppose if they chose to have a beer, then that's up to them. But
just one.
Just one.
Yeah, 2 or 3. Yeah.
But there's not a great cost to it, and I think it's a positive thing. It gets people talking again. I mean, one thing that is the same in every business I've ever worked in is departmental stress. And it's not a massive thing, but it's generally born of people not communicating. And one of the things that home working has compounded is people not communicating. And so especially if you've got issues across departments, it's a great way of getting people together in a relaxed atmosphere and just having a bit of a chat. It's certainly not about work. It's about socialising, and it's about interaction, and it's about building relationships. So I see it as a really positive thing. You can't cost everything. You really can't. And who can define the benefit of it? I couldn't tell you in monetary terms. So therefore, it's something that you've got to on gut trust that works, and I really think it does. So yeah, probably for the cost of £200 every month, for the sandwiches. 'Cause they're not cheap sandwiches, let's face it.
Nothing's
you get side.
Nothing's nothing's cheap.
Yeah. It's not the end of the world. So yeah, I think it's a really positive move. Seems to be received quite well by people. So yeah,
I think it does. Like you said, it does help that rapport building. Everyone being in office the same day, but actually, then it's not all about work. On one of those days, we're all socialising together. Yeah. An important point just to come back to, you said about communication. With the whole remote workforce, people's communication has been different. I think sometimes it's not there. But actually, when it is there, that might be a message on Teams or other sort of work chats or whatever. Now, historically, I used to. I typically don't like texting or WhatsApp. I use it a lot, but actually, if I've got to communicate with someone, I'd much rather do that either over the phone as a minimum or face to face if I can, because then whatever I'm saying, the words I'm using are not going to be misinterpreted. So quite often people might get a text and think, "What do you mean by that?" Because you haven't got that dialogue or the way the way someone's saying something. And I think maybe that has impacted probably relationship. Not necessarily here. I don't think we've seen that here, but from what I've heard, sort of from friends and stuff. Oh, someone says this. Well, maybe he didn't mean it like that. No, and I think that sometimes those messages can be misconstrued just because they're read, and it will depend on your mood on how you might read something like that.
I totally agree. It's the same with emails, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's always it's always much easier. It's about what you don't say, and it's based on the individual receiving the message to interpret it how they see it, which may not be how it was meant. I mean, I also think that's a bit of a generational thing as well. I mean, I look at my grandchildren now who communicate entirely, it appears to me, via social media. Whereas historically we didn't have social media, so we had to talk. We didn't have email when I was young, so I mean, we had to talk if you wanted to get something done. So I think there's a generational aspect to it. And to be fair, those younger generations will adapt to this and actually find a way. It will make more sense to them than it will do me. Maybe we do more interpretation than we should do. So that's a changing world thing. But I totally agree that actually meeting with people and seeing people face to face has always got to be beneficial. So I really very, very much welcome it. I think managers and businesses now need to be a bit more pragmatic about things, whereas as I talked about earlier, that it's somewhat alien to a certain age group to have people working from home full time. We've all got to sort of get with the program to a certain extent because it's not going to go away. We've got to learn to work with it, and that as I said, requires a certain level of pragmatism, and that's certainly something I've tried to adopt with it. I fully accept it now the way it is. Let's find a way of working with it so it's best for everybody. And I think these nice little, reasonably cheap sessions once a month are a step on the way to that. I don't think that's the whole answer.
No, sure.
And I think we're still learning with it because it's so new. I don't know the long-term effects of somebody working from home 4 days a week and how they become detached. Again, I think it depends on the individual. Some people need to be around people a lot, full time, and they thrive on that.
And I think we've got different, like you said, we've got very different departments in this business. We're a traditional software house, designers, developers, and like we talked about earlier. And some of the developers, for example, they may be present in the office, but when they're in the zone coding, they might just have headphones in. You won't hear from them all day.
They could be working,
but it's a presence. Talk to us about one other thing that we've done recently is the shared parental leave. So what most businesses would have offered and to what we're offering now in terms of shared parental leave.
Well, again, I mean, this is a reasonably new thing. Historically, maternity leave is what people took because it was the mother that did it. But we live in a different world now where there's paternity leave as well. Now, what I've found in terms of from an HR perspective or managing teams over the years is that in general, what happens is the mother takes that paternity leave off and that period, and the father will take the paternity leave and probably take the 2 weeks. For some people who are young, especially at that stage where you're having kids, taking paternity leave is quite a expensive option because you're not getting what you did, with your normal salary. So one of the things we chose to do was make paternity leave full pay. So we'll take the hit on that. We won't pay the statutory amount, so we'll pay full pay on that. So there's no losing out. What we said with maternity leave is we won't use the statutory. We'll give 6 months maternity leave full pay, which I think is a really positive thing. Also, should the in terms of the parents, let's say the mother choose to go back to work full time and the father take that period off, which is the shared parental leave part of it. We will match that. We won't discriminate against the male for taking that time off. Where some businesses do, they won't pay the male full pay on that. So we will pay. So I think it's a really progressive thing. I'd like to go further and pay people for their entirety of their of maternity leave, but that's rather expensive. So what we're saying at the minute is, we will honour shared parental leave and pay, and not discriminate against the male. We'll pay the full 6 months for that as well. So good stuff on that one, I think.
So Andy, we've spoken a lot about employee benefits. One of the things you mentioned earlier was P11D, which is obviously a form of tax in the UK. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how important that is, and how we go about, or how businesses can go about ensuring they're getting that right when it comes to benefits and submitting P11Ds?
Yeah, so P11D is the way that HMRC record benefits in kind. So what a benefit in kind is a benefit that an individual gets, an employee gets, that has a tax implication. So generally what would happen is that you would report your P11D on an annual basis. We do it internally, or your accountant can do it. We do it internally because it's much cheaper. We use some software. We use Sage software, Sage P11D, and that allows us to input an individual employee's benefits, which we then report up to HMRC. And in general, what would happen with that then is they would adapt or change an employee's tax code to offset the tax that is due on those certain benefits. So it's an interesting thing, actually, because, again, it's something that people would need to research themselves, but some things are P11D'able, for want of a better phrase, and some things that you think would be aren't. So, for example, private health insurance is P11D'able. There is a tax implication of that. A company car with private use is P11D'able. But things like death in service or income protection, there is no P11D cost with that, no tax cost to that to the individual. So it's really about you obviously take advice from your accountant or your internal finance person. But it's something we do on an annual basis on behalf of the employee to report on their tax and change their tax code. Now, I suppose one of the things about it is it's a year in arrears to a certain extent. So what you can do as an individual is you could contact HMRC yourself and say, oh, by the way, my circumstances have changed. I've got this car. I've changed my car. I've now got health insurance. This is the cost. And they will change your tax code immediately.
Right, yeah.
We'd still have to report on it because it's the requirement to report on that. But actually, what you could see if you did that early is that you'd have your tax code aligned to where you are, as opposed to it changing next year, which is something that might suit a lot of people.
Good. And what are the chances of HMRC? You might not be able to answer this one. It's a bit of a funny question. But what are the chances of HMRC changing something that's not P11D'able now? They say actually this is a benefit. So you mentioned obviously the health insurance is P11D'able, but the death in service isn't. What's the likelihood of them turning around in a couple of years and saying actually we're now seeing that as a benefit, so that's now tax?
I think it's hugely unlikely. I mean, you could never say never, because the government will raise taxes as it needs to, and God knows they've probably got a bit of a hole at the minute, as we know. But I think it's highly unlikely they'll be raising taxes against something like death in service. I mean, because I suppose you might argue, what's the benefit to the individual? Because there is no benefit in kind to them other than, I mean, the benefit is their immediate family.
Okay.
I think people would have a problem paying individual tax on something that they weren't going to see the benefit for because they were dead.
Yeah, and I think those non-P11D'able items are, I think, staff will see that as more of a benefit, again, if it's not costing them anything.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just a benefit, isn't it? Whereas they might choose to opt out of a company pension scheme or the health insurance if they think, oh, actually, that's going to cost me money. I'm young. I don't want to worry about a pension or health insurance just yet. It's not really.
There's no P11D implication with the pension schemes in general. I mean, that's another benefit, obviously, that we've rolled out in the business. I mean, there is tax benefit in having a company pension, in that you get the 20% tax relief on that.
Sure.
And you get the basic. I mean, it could be more than that, but the company must provide 3% of your income to your pension, as well as your 5%, which is the minimum you have to do, and you get 20% from the government on that as well. So that's a positive thing. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, you get an additional 20% as well. So anybody who's a 40% taxpayer should absolutely have a pension, because you can't fail to make money on it. That's the thing about it. But yeah, so there's another positive in terms of benefits with pensions.
So Andy, mental health and well-being of employees have become increasingly important in the workplace. What steps can companies take to support the mental health and well-being of their employees?
It is a big deal, and I think probably the biggest thing, it's more on a human level than anything else. So we talk about the business, but we're all humans within that business. And I think the biggest thing for me is listen. It's changed quite dramatically in my life as a manager, and particularly as an HR manager over the last probably 10 years. The way people interact with each other, especially men, especially young men, if I'm honest, has changed. I've found that people. Well, let's go back again. Let's go back again to the old days. I grew up. I started work in a very male-orientated environment. I grew up in a very male-orientated environment. It was so different then to now, and to show weakness, as it would be seen then, to actually open up and say, I'm not feeling good, I'm down or depressed, it just never would have happened. People would have gone home and suffered. They probably would have drunk. They probably maybe it could have been drug. They could be taking recreational drugs just to get through it. But they would never open up and talk about it, because it was definitively seen as weakness. One of the changes I've seen, certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, is the ability of men now to come out and talk about it, and have the guts to do that, because it does take guts to do that. So I think listening is really important. And the first thing I'd always say to a guy if he comes to me and said, look, I'm struggling, is congratulations, because you made that first step.
Yeah.
From there, we have to work out what we can do to help. And there are, look, like I say, they've made that first step. That's really important. We're on the way down the road now to resolve things. We can't always, but actually a problem shared is a problem halved. And I actually genuinely believe that. Yeah. So what I would do at that point, once somebody's opened up, is certainly look out for them. You're gonna privately speak to them on a regular basis, making sure they're okay, that sort of thing. And really, we'll do all we can as a business. We'll be supportive. We'll understand that there may be additional flexibility required in people's work. Part of the health insurance we have, there is a mental health line on that sort of thing. So we'll always encourage them to call that line and see if they can help as well. But also it's about, look, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor. So what you need to do is encourage people to take the next step, is get themselves to their GP and move it a bit further down the road. I mean, that's part of the problem, really. I mean, with men, I don't exclude women from this, but I would say that historically, women have been generally much better at looking after their mental health to a certain extent. Yeah. They communicate in many ways better than men do. Men tend to hold it in a little bit, and there's this macho bit about, I'm not going to show weakness. So I think that's a really encouraging thing about where we are now in society and culturally, that men feel more comfortable opening up, and it's my job to make that easier, to be open and honest with people and actually be approachable. So I think the old days of HR in the old days when I was working in bigger companies was quite aggressive, actually. I mean, but I don't know, people might have a view that HR were there to support them, which they were to a certain extent, but fundamentally they were there to support the business.
Yeah. And protect the business from any lawsuits or anything like that. And you're not whistleblowing here, by the way. You're not going to don't dig anyone out on the corner.
No, I imagine most of the HR professionals I were back in the day were very aware of what they were doing. But yeah, my job is to protect the business. Undoubtedly, of course it is, but in a much softer way. I mean, it's not about HR used to be quite an aggressive art in my view, and I think it's mellowed a bit because it's had to, because of corporate law has made it made it go down that route. But I also think that there's benefits seen by all businesses in actually not taking that hard-nosed approach. You look after your staff, you get more out of them, you retain them. That's the really important bit about this.
Eddie, with remote workers being more prevalent in today's workforce, how do you, what's the impact of that in that mental health topic from a HR professional? Would you find that more difficult to manage with someone fully remote working? I know we haven't got people fully remote working, but if they were, would you find that more difficult to manage?
Absolutely. I think realistically, there's a lot here we just don't know because it's so new. I know people who've been working from home for some considerable time, but not to the extent that we do in business now. And I think there are, again, I think it's down to the individual. Some people will thrive in that environment, and some people won't. And unfortunately, if somebody is remote full time, you can do your best. I mean, it's not only about HR; it's about the line management as well, and it's about people's work colleagues.
Yeah,
line managers should be talking to their staff if they're remote on a regular basis. That said, it doesn't mean to say that you're going to pick up on things because people tend to hide things very, very well.
and they might not be comfortable telling their direct line manager.
Absolutely.
And that's where HR as a department, is obviously so important.
It is. I mean, look, let's face it. People working remotely on their own all the time, having less interaction, it's very difficult to have those sorts of conversations or pick up on signals or understand what's going on without prying too much, And invariably, people do tend to hide things like this, so it's always going to be very difficult to get it. I think the point is that you've got to do your best with that. It's down to the line manager and HR to work together to ensure that there is good communication going on. And when you do pick up on signals, you've probably got to address them and have the difficult conversation. Why not? There are lines, of course. You can't cross there are rules. You can't cross these lines sometimes by asking these difficult questions. But you've got to find a way. There's no easy answer to this really, other than keep those communication lines open, keep the dialogue going, and look out for people. Look out for those signs.
That's sound advice on what you were saying, about men in particular. Obviously, that's a real big topic at the moment, is that male communication.
Yeah.
From my personal experience, you've been my line manager for 10 years. You've always had an open door policy. And actually what I've found is, in times of stress, or if I'm finding things particularly difficult with work or even personally, I can come to your office, you'll have your door open, and I can pop my head round and say, have you got a sec, mate? I would actually find that very difficult to do if I was fully remote. Yeah. Because actually, I don't know what you're doing. No. And I've got to either book some time in, which is a bit more sort of official. Yeah. Having that, obviously we've got a very good sort of, relationship anyway. It's not just work. We get on quite well outside of work. But actually having that relationship and that personal sort of approach with either your line manager or the head of HR to actually go and just be able to talk openly to them I would say that's a massive benefit. I think not that we should advertise that as a benefit, but it is a benefit. And I think those that are fully working remotely that haven't met members of their team or perhaps even their line manager, I feel like they might be missing out on that personal interaction.
I totally agree. I think we also got to be aware that this is not just a work issue. This is an issue that hits all walks of life. We've got people now that are unable to get a GP appointment. We have GPs and say, well, the first step is we'll do you an online consultation.
And the waiting lists for any sort of referral to mental health professional, or if there's something that's been diagnosed, we need to be tested for something. Yeah, that could be year, 2 years. Absolutely, sort of waiting list.
So these are issues that we're having to learn and work with throughout society. It's not only the world of work. So look, I think with most things, certainly with HR, there are hard and fast rules. Okay, there are things that you can and you cannot do, and you've got to learn and think your way through them. But what's most important is being human, as I said before. We're all humans. We all have sensitivities, and it's just about being open to those and having just having the ability to have the conversation. I mean, quite honestly, work's, of course, it's important. That's what you're paid to do. But, it pales into insignificance when people are struggling mentally, physically. At that stage, you've got to sort of throw the management bit away a little bit and have a decent human conversation and care. As I say, work matters less, really, than in the grand scheme of things than people's health and their well-being.
Right, guys, that's been episode 10 of The Corner. Thanks for joining us. If you've got any questions related to human resource, employee management, P11D or tax, Drop a comment below and we'll be sure to come back to you. See you next time on The Corner.